I was sitting in my corner office at Blackstone Financial, reviewing quarterly reports for the 3 o'clock board meeting when my world collapsed in 88 words. Timothy Walsh, a nervous assistant from the executive floor, knocked hesitantly on my door. "Miss Mary Parker, you were terminated an hour ago." I laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke. "Impossible," I said, gathering my presentation materials. "I'm leading the board meeting." But Timothy's face remained serious as he followed me toward the boardroom. I swiped my security badge at the entrance. Access denied. Timothy examined the termination paperwork closely, his face turning pale. "Your badge is locked, and that signature is forged." The hallway suddenly felt colder as I stared at the red light on the badge scanner. My hands trembled slightly as I processed what Timothy had just said. A forged signature meant someone had deliberately set me up, but who would want me gone so badly that they'd resort to fraud? "We need to see Janet Sterling in Human Resources immediately," I told Timothy, my voice steadier than I felt. My mind raced through possibilities as we walked down the marble corridor toward the HR department. I'd been with Blackstone Financial for 3 years, working my way up from senior analyst to vice president of client relations. I handled some of our biggest accounts, including the Meridian construction portfolio worth over $50 million. Janet looked genuinely shocked when we burst into her office. She was a woman in her early 50s with graying brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses, known for her meticulous attention to detail and fair treatment of employees. "Mary, what's this about a termination? I haven't processed any paperwork for you." I handed her the documents Timothy had shown me. As Janet examined them, her expression grew increasingly puzzled. "This letterhead looks authentic, but I definitely didn't sign this. And this employee number doesn't match our system. Who else has access to create termination documents?" I asked, trying to keep my voice professional despite the panic rising in my chest. "Only department heads and executive assistants with proper authorization," Janet replied, pulling up her computer system. "Let me check the digital trail." Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she traced the document's origin. According to this, the paperwork was submitted electronically at 11:47 this morning by Claire Washington. My heart sank. Claire was my executive assistant, someone I'd trusted implicitly for the past 2 years. She knew my schedule, had access to my files, and handled confidential client information daily. The betrayal felt like a physical blow to my stomach. "There has to be an explanation," I said weakly. "Claire would never do this on her own." Timothy suggested we review the security footage from the executive floor. Marcus Thompson, the head security guard, was a former police officer in his 60s who took his job seriously. He pulled up the overnight recordings on his monitor, fast-forwarding through hours of empty hallways until we spotted movement around 2 in the morning. There was Claire, using her keycard to enter my office. We watched as she sat at my desk, accessed my computer, and spent nearly an hour working on something before printing documents and leaving. The timestamp matched exactly when the termination paperwork had been created. "I don't understand," I whispered, watching my trusted assistant betray me in high definition. "Why would she do this?" That's when we heard footsteps in the hallway. Claire Washington entered the security office, her usually perfect blonde hair disheveled and her blue eyes red from crying. She'd obviously been looking for me and overheard our conversation through the partially open door. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, collapsing into a chair. "I'm so sorry, Mary. I never wanted to hurt you." "Why?" was all I could manage to say. Claire's story tumbled out through tears and broken sentences. Someone had threatened her job if she didn't cooperate, but it was worse than that. Her 18-year-old son, Jake, was a sophomore at Northwestern University on a company-sponsored scholarship program. The person who approached her made it clear that refusing to help would result in both her termination and the immediate cancellation of Jake's scholarship. They said it would just be temporary, Claire explained, wiping her eyes with a tissue Janet had handed her. That you'd be reinstated once some internal investigation was completed. They made it sound like you were being protected from something bigger. Who approached you? I demanded, though I was beginning to suspect the answer would complicate everything even further. I can't say, Claire whispered. They made me sign a confidentiality agreement. If I talk, Jake loses everything, and I get sued for breach of contract. The pieces were falling into place, but none of them made sense. Someone with significant power within Blackstone Financial wanted me out of the picture, at least temporarily. They were willing to forge documents, threaten employees, and manipulate company scholarship programs to achieve their goal. This wasn't a simple workplace disagreement or personality conflict. Claire, you need to tell us who did this, Timothy said gently. Mary's career and reputation are on the line, and if she doesn't tell us, whoever orchestrated this will just find another way to hurt both of you, Janet added pragmatically. People who operate like this don't stop with one success. Claire looked between all of us, clearly torn between protecting her son's future and doing the right thing. Finally, she took a shaky breath. I don't know their name, but they had executive-level access to everything. They knew details about my personal life that aren't in my employee file. They knew about Jake's scholarship, my mortgage payments, even my mother's medical bills. This revelation sent chills down my spine. Someone had been conducting surveillance on company employees, gathering personal information to use as leverage. This was far beyond simple corporate politics. This was systematic manipulation and possibly illegal intimidation. We need to figure out who's behind this before the board meeting, I said, checking my watch. We had less than 2 hours before I was supposed to present the quarterly client relations report to the board of directors. If someone planned to publicly humiliate me or announce my termination during that meeting, I needed to be prepared. Timothy pulled out his phone. I can help you investigate. I know how to access employee databases and cross-reference information. Janet nodded. I'll start reviewing who has had access to personnel files recently. If someone's been gathering personal information on employees, there should be digital fingerprints somewhere in our system. Claire stood up slowly. I'll help too. I know what documents they made me create and where I was supposed to submit them. Maybe we can trace the electronic trail backward. Looking at these 3 people, a nervous assistant who could have simply walked away, an HR director who could have protected herself by following protocol, and an executive assistant who had made a terrible mistake but was willing to make it right, I felt a surge of gratitude mixed with determination. Someone powerful at Blackstone Financial had underestimated all of us. They'd assumed that threatening one person would be enough, that the rest of us would simply accept their version of events without question. They were about to learn that some fights are worth having, regardless of the odds. Back in my office, I logged into my computer system with a new sense of urgency. If someone wanted me gone badly enough to orchestrate this elaborate scheme, there had to be something in my work files they were trying to hide or protect. I started with my most recent projects, particularly the high-value accounts that generated significant revenue for the firm. The Meridian Construction account immediately caught my attention. As one of the largest commercial construction companies in the Midwest, they maintained substantial cash reserves with Blackstone Financial for project financing and equipment purchases. Their account balance should have been approximately $52 million based on their last quarterly deposit. When I pulled up their current balance, my blood ran cold. The account showed only $49.3 million. Nearly $3 million was missing. "Timothy, come look at this," I called out, my voice tight with concern. He leaned over my shoulder as I scrolled through the transaction history for the past 6 months. The discrepancies weren't immediately obvious. Someone had been very careful to structure the unauthorized transfers in amounts that wouldn't trigger automatic fraud alerts. 500,000 here, 300,000 there, spread out over several months, and always coinciding with legitimate large transactions that would mask the irregularities. But what made my stomach drop was seeing my own digital signature, authorizing each transfer. "I never approved these," I whispered, pointing at the screen. "Look at the dates. March 15th. I was in Chicago at the construction industry conference. April 22nd, I was home with the flu. May 7th, I was in court for my divorce proceedings." Timothy examined the records more closely. The authorization codes match your security clearance, but the IP addresses show these transactions were processed from different computers throughout the building. I pulled out my desk calendar and cross-referenced the dates with my personal schedule. Every single unauthorized transfer had been processed when I was verifiably somewhere else, yet the system showed my credentials, approving multi-million-dollar movements of client funds. Someone's been using my identity for months, I realized. They have my digital signature, my authorization codes, and detailed knowledge of my schedule, so they'd know when I wouldn't be here to notice. The pattern became clearer as we dug deeper. The stolen money hadn't been transferred to random accounts. It was moving through a series of shell companies with generic names like Sunrise Holdings, LLC, and Mountain View Investments Group. Each company existed just long enough to receive and forward the funds before dissolving. I was reaching for my phone to call our forensic accounting department when someone knocked on my office door. David Martinez, our chief financial officer, entered with a concerned expression. David was in his early 40s, with dark hair, an unusually calm demeanor that made him effective at handling financial crises. Today, however, he looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Mary, I heard there was some confusion about your employment status," he said carefully. "I wanted to make sure everything was resolved before the board meeting." "David, thank goodness you're here," I said, gesturing toward my computer screen. "Someone's been embezzling funds from the Meridian account using my credentials. We need to launch an immediate investigation." I expected relief or concern from David, but instead I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he looked at the evidence. His usual professional composure seemed forced, and he kept glancing toward the door as if planning an escape route. That's very concerning," David said slowly. "We should probably handle this through proper channels. Maybe start with an internal audit before involving outside investigators." "David, this is $2.7 million of client money," I pressed. "We need to contact Meridian Construction immediately and inform them of potential fraud. We also need to secure all related accounts to prevent further losses." Of course," David agreed quickly, but he made no move toward the phone. Instead, he seemed increasingly agitated. "Mary, can I ask you something privately?" Timothy tactfully stepped outside, closing the door behind him. As soon as we were alone, David's carefully maintained facade cracked completely. "They told me you were being terminated for cause," he said quietly. "They said there was evidence of financial impropriety in your accounts." "Who told you that?" I demanded. David's face went pale. "I can't. I shouldn't be talking about this. But Mary, if you're planning to fight the termination, you need to know that there's more evidence against you than just these transactions." "What kind of evidence?" "Documents showing you opened accounts with several of those shell companies. Bank records showing deposits into your personal accounts that correlate with the timing of these transfers." Even photographs of you meeting with representatives from companies that received the stolen funds. I stared at David in disbelief. The setup was far more elaborate than I'd imagined. Someone hadn't just stolen my digital credentials. They'd created an entire false narrative with fabricated evidence designed to frame me for embezzlement. David, you know me, I said desperately. You know I would never steal client funds. I've worked here for 3 years building my reputation. Why would I risk everything for money I don't need? I know, David said miserably. That's why I'm warning you. Whoever orchestrated this has been planning it for a very long time. They have answers for every question you might raise and evidence to support every accusation they plan to make. So you think I should just accept being framed for embezzlement? Let them destroy my career and possibly send me to prison? David looked toward the window, struggling with some internal conflict. Finally, he turned back to me with resolution in his eyes. No, he said firmly. I think you should fight back. But you need to understand what you're up against. This isn't just about stolen money, Mary. The person behind this has been planning your downfall for months, maybe longer. They have resources, connections, and apparently no moral boundaries. Then help me figure out who it is, I said. You have access to financial records I can't see. You know which executives have the authority to manipulate digital signatures and authorization codes. David hesitated for a long moment, then moved toward my computer. Show me exactly what you've found so far. As I walked him through the evidence, I noticed his expression shifting from concern to something approaching fear. When we reached the list of shell companies, he actually stepped backward. David, what is it? Do you recognize these company names? Mary, he said quietly, I think we need to get you out of this building immediately. If my suspicions are correct, you're in more danger than you realize. Before I could ask what he meant, we heard footsteps in the hallway and voices approaching my office. David quickly minimized the financial records on my screen and gestured for me to act normally. We'll continue this conversation later, he said loudly enough for anyone outside to hear. Let me know if you need anything else for the board presentation. But as he left my office, David paused at the door and mouthed silently, Trust no one. That's when I realized my investigation had just uncovered something far bigger than simple embezzlement. I was dealing with a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Blackstone Financial, involving people with the power to destroy evidence, manipulate financial records, and apparently eliminate anyone who got too close to the truth. 20 minutes after David left my office, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of waiting for answers, I was going to confront him directly. His nervous behavior and cryptic warnings suggested he knew more about the conspiracy than he was willing to admit, and I was running out of time to uncover the truth. I found David in his office on the executive floor, staring out his window at the downtown skyline. His usually immaculate desk was covered with scattered papers, and there were 2 empty coffee cups beside his computer. Signs of stress that were completely unlike his normal, organized approach to work. David, we need to talk, I said, closing his office door behind me. No more hints or warnings. I need to know exactly what's happening and who's behind it. He turned from the window with resignation in his eyes. Mary, if I tell you what I know, it will destroy both our careers and possibly put us in physical danger. My career is already destroyed, I pointed out. In less than 90 minutes, I'm supposed to present to the board of directors, but instead someone plans to announce my termination for embezzlement. My reputation, my financial security, everything I've worked for is already gone unless I can prove my innocence. David sat heavily in his chair and rubbed his temples. The person behind this is Robert Blackstone himself. The name hit me like a physical blow. Robert Blackstone was not just our CEO, he was the founder's son, the heir to a financial empire built over 3 generations. He had connections throughout the banking industry, political influence, and resources that made fighting him seem impossible. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would the CEO of the company want to frame me for embezzlement? Because you accidentally discovered something that could bring down the entire firm," David explained. "Remember 6 months ago when you questioned some irregularities in the construction industry accounts? You thought you were just doing due diligence, but you stumbled onto a much bigger problem." I remembered the conversation clearly. I'd noticed that several construction companies were maintaining unusually large cash reserves while simultaneously taking out high-interest loans for equipment purchases. It didn't make financial sense, and I'd mentioned it to David as a potential opportunity to offer better investment services to those clients. "Robert has been using client funds to finance his personal real estate investments," David continued. "Not just small amounts. We're talking about $50 million or more moved through various accounts to purchase commercial properties, luxury developments, even a private island in the Caribbean. That's massive fraud," I said, struggling to process the scope of what David was describing. "How long has this been going on?" "At least 2 years, possibly longer. Robert created an elaborate system of shell companies and fake investment vehicles to hide the money movement. The profits from his real estate deals get funneled back into the client accounts, so, on paper, everything balances. But if the real estate market crashed, or if clients demanded large withdrawals simultaneously, the entire scheme would collapse. And I was getting too close to discovering it, I realized. Exactly. When you started asking questions about construction industry cash flows, Robert realized you might eventually trace the connection to his shell companies. So, he decided to eliminate the threat by framing you for embezzlement. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. The forged termination, the stolen digital signatures, the fabricated evidence. It's all designed to discredit me before I can expose what he's been doing. David nodded grimly. And there's more. Robert plans to announce your theft at today's board meeting, making you a public scapegoat. While everyone focuses on your supposed crimes, he'll quietly transfer the remaining stolen funds offshore and cover his tracks permanently. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "If you've known about the fraud for months, why didn't you report it earlier?" David's shoulders sagged. "Because Robert has leverage over me, too. My daughter needs surgery for a rare heart condition, experimental treatment that costs $300,000 and isn't covered by insurance. Robert privately arranged for the company's medical foundation to cover the expenses. If I cross him, my daughter dies." The cruelty of the situation was breathtaking. Robert Blackstone wasn't just a thief, he was a manipulator who identified people's most vulnerable points and exploited them ruthlessly. Claire's son's scholarship, David's daughter's medical treatment, probably dozens of other employees trapped by similar arrangements. David, if we don't stop him, how many more people will he hurt? How many more employees will be coerced into helping him? How many clients will lose their retirement savings when this whole scheme eventually collapses? Before David could answer, his office phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his face went white. It's Robert. He's probably wondering why I'm not in the conference room setting up for the board meeting. Don't answer it, I said quickly. But it was too late. David's hand moved toward the phone reflexively, and the ringing suddenly stopped as someone answered it remotely, a feature of the executive phone system I'd forgotten about. "David, please join me in conference room." Immediately. Robert's voice came through the speaker, smooth and controlled. "And bring Mary with you. We have some important matters to discuss before the board arrives." The line went dead, leaving us staring at each other in silence. We both knew this was a trap. Robert had either overheard our conversation through the office's intercom system, or he'd been monitoring David's activities all along. "Mary, you need to leave the building right now," David whispered urgently. "Get in your car and drive somewhere public with lots of people. Call the police, the FBI, anyone who will listen." "What about you?" "I'll handle Robert. Maybe I can convince him that you don't know anything significant." "David, he'll destroy you. You said yourself that he controls your daughter's medical treatment." "Some things are more important than my job or even my family's security," David said quietly. "I should have stood up to him months ago. Maybe if I had, you wouldn't be in this position now." That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway, multiple people walking with purpose toward David's office. Through the frosted glass door, I could see shadows moving, and I recognized the distinctive silhouette of Patricia Williams, our head of security. "They're coming," I whispered. David moved quickly to his desk drawer and pulled out a small thumb drive. "Everything I know about Robert's real estate scheme is on here. Bank records, shell company documentation, transfer histories, everything. If something happens to me, make sure this gets to the authorities." The footsteps stopped outside David's office, and someone tried the door handle. When they found it locked, Patricia's voice called out, "Mr. Martinez! Mr. Blackstone requests that you open the door immediately." David handed me the thumb drive and pointed toward a second door that connected his office to the adjoining conference room. "Go through there and take the service elevator down to the parking garage. Don't use your regular car. They'll be watching for it." "David." "Go, Mary. Make this count." I slipped through the connecting door just as David unlocked his main office entrance. The last thing I heard before the door closed was Robert's voice, calm and friendly. "David, I think we need to have a conversation about company loyalty." Racing through the empty conference room toward the service elevator, I clutched David's thumb drive and realized that everything had changed. I was no longer just fighting for my job or my reputation. I was now the only person who could expose a massive financial fraud and save dozens of employees from continued manipulation. But first, I had to survive the next hour. In the parking garage, sitting in my Honda Accord with the engine running and my hands shaking, I faced the reality of my situation. I had 30 minutes before Robert Blackstone planned to destroy my reputation in front of the board of directors, and I was now in possession of evidence that could expose his crimes if I could figure out how to use it. I pulled out my personal cell phone and called Sarah Bennett, my closest friend from law school who now worked as an assistant district attorney in the white-collar crimes division. Sarah had always been the smartest person in our class, with an intuitive understanding of complex financial crimes and the legal system's intricacies. "Mary, shouldn't you be in some important board meeting right now?" Sarah's familiar voice was reassuring despite the circumstances. "Sarah, I need your help urgently. I'm about to be framed for embezzlement by my own CEO, but I have evidence that he's the one who's been stealing millions of dollars from client accounts." There was a pause. "Okay, start from the beginning and tell me everything." I explained the entire situation as quickly as possible. The forged termination, the stolen digital signatures, Claire's coercion, David's revelations about Robert's real estate scheme, and the thumb drive I now possessed with financial records proving the fraud. "Mary, this is bigger than you realize," Sarah said when I finished. "If what you're describing is accurate, we're talking about federal crimes, mail fraud, wire fraud, possibly RICO violations. If he's been systematically coercing employees, the FBI would definitely be interested. But will they listen to me? By the time this board meeting is over, I'll be publicly accused of the same crimes I'm trying to report. Robert will paint me as a disgruntled employee making false accusations. That's why you need irrefutable evidence, Sarah explained. Financial records, recorded conversations, digital forensics that prove the money trail. Can you access that information? I looked at David's thumb drive. I have some of it, but I don't know how complete it is. Where are you right now? Sitting in the parking garage of my office building, trying to figure out what to do next. Get somewhere safe with reliable internet access, Sarah instructed. I'm going to send you the contact information for Special Agent Jennifer Rodriguez with the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force. She specializes in corporate embezzlement cases, and she'll know how to handle evidence like what you've described. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text message from Timothy. Robert moved the board meeting up by 15 minutes, starting in 20 minutes now. Says he has urgent matter to address first. Sarah, they're accelerating their timeline, I said. The board meeting starts in 20 minutes. Then you need to move fast. Can you get back into the building without being detected? Maybe through the service entrance. But Sarah, what if they're right? What if I can't prove my innocence, and this ruins my life? Mary, listen to me carefully, Sarah said with the authority that had made her an effective prosecutor. Innocent people don't create elaborate schemes to frame others. Innocent people don't coerce employees by threatening their children's futures. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for everyone Robert Blackstone has manipulated and everyone he plans to victimize in the future. After ending the call, I opened David's thumb drive on my personal laptop. What I found exceeded my worst expectations. David had meticulously documented 2 years of fraudulent transactions, including emails between Robert and several shell company representatives, bank statements showing money flowing from client accounts to Robert's personal real estate investments, and even photographs of properties Robert had purchased with stolen funds. But the most damaging evidence was a series of recorded phone conversations where Robert discussed his exit strategy, a plan to transfer all remaining stolen funds to offshore accounts and disappear if the fraud was ever discovered. In one recording, he specifically mentioned framing that nosy Parker woman to buy himself time for the final transfers. I was studying the financial records when my phone rang. The caller ID showed David's office number. Mary, thank God. David's voice was strained and urgent. Are you still in the building? I'm in the parking garage. David, are you okay? For now, but listen carefully. Robert knows you have evidence of his crimes. He's telling the board that you've been working with outside accomplices to embezzle funds and that you're planning to flee the country with stolen money. That's ridiculous. It gets worse. He's produced fake evidence showing that you've been in contact with foreign investment firms about transferring large amounts of money overseas. He's making it sound like an international conspiracy. How is that possible? He's been planning this for months, Mary. He has fabricated emails, doctored bank records, even fake travel documents suggesting you've been planning to leave the country. The board is completely convinced. I felt a crushing sense of despair. How could I fight against someone with unlimited resources and the willingness to create any evidence necessary to support his lies? David, there has to be something we can do. Actually, there is. I've been secretly recording every conversation I've had with Robert for the past 3 months, including today's meeting where he admitted to framing you. I also have access to the real-time financial system that shows ongoing transfers happening right now while the board meeting is taking place. What do you mean, ongoing transfers? Robert is stealing more money even as we speak, probably planning to complete his exit strategy immediately after the board meeting. If you can get into that boardroom and present evidence of active theft occurring in real time, it will be impossible for him to explain. How do I get in there without being arrested? Through the service elevator to the executive floor, then use the catering entrance to the boardroom. I'll create a distraction at exactly 2:45 to draw security away from that area. I checked my watch. 2:35. David, if this doesn't work, we're both finished. Mary, I've been a coward for too long. My daughter's surgery is next week, and I've already arranged alternative financing through a medical loan company. I'm not going to let Robert's threats control me anymore. What about the other employees he's been manipulating? That's exactly why we have to stop him now. Claire, Timothy, probably dozens of others. They all deserve to work without fear of blackmail and coercion. As I gathered my laptop and the thumb drive, preparing to re-enter the building through the service entrance, I thought about all the people Robert had hurt through his systematic manipulation. Employees forced to compromise their integrity to protect their families. Clients whose retirement funds had been stolen to finance luxury real estate purchases. The culture of fear he'd created throughout the company. But I also thought about the people who had chosen to help me despite the risks. Timothy, who could have simply delivered the termination notice and walked away. Janet, who could have processed the paperwork without question. Claire, who could have kept silent to protect her son's scholarship. And David, who was risking his daughter's medical treatment to do the right thing. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not by the strongest or most powerful people, but by ordinary individuals who decide that some principles are worth defending, regardless of the personal cost. Taking a deep breath, I headed toward the service entrance, ready to crash a board meeting and expose the biggest financial fraud in Blackstone Financial's history. The service elevator carried me to the executive floor with agonizing slowness. My heart pounded as I checked my watch. 2:44. David's distraction would begin in 1 minute, giving me a small window to reach the boardroom undetected. I could hear voices echoing from the main conference area as I stepped into the service hallway. Robert's voice dominated the conversation, smooth and authoritative as he addressed the board members. Through the catering entrance, I caught fragments of his presentation. Unfortunate situation with one of our senior executives. Evidence of systematic embezzlement. Approximately $2.7 million missing from client accounts. My stomach clenched as I realized Robert was already presenting his fabricated case against me. In just a few minutes, he would have convinced the board that I was a criminal who had betrayed their trust and stolen from vulnerable clients. At exactly 2:45, I heard David's voice from the main hallway. Security! We have a problem in the server room. Possible breach of financial systems. His voice carried genuine urgency. And I heard Patricia Williams and 2 other security guards responding immediately. This was my chance. I pushed through the catering entrance into the boardroom, my laptop and David's thumb drive clutched in my hands. The scene that greeted me was worse than I had imagined. Robert stood at the head of the polished conference table, pointing at a projection screen showing bank records with my forged authorization codes highlighted in red. 12 board members sat around the table, their faces grave with concern and disappointment. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent room, "everything you've just heard is a lie." The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Several board members stood up in surprise. Robert's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, and then calculated composure as he realized he needed to regain control of the situation. "Mary," Robert said with false sympathy, "I understand you're upset about the termination, but disrupting a board meeting won't help your situation. Security will be here momentarily to escort you from the building." "Mr. Blackstone is right," said William Foster, the board chairman. Foster was a man in his 70s with silver hair and an aristocratic bearing, someone who had served on corporate boards for decades and commanded respect throughout the financial industry. Miss Parker, while we sympathize with your position, this is highly irregular. We cannot allow terminated employees to— Mr. Foster, I interrupted, what if I told you that the real embezzler is standing at the head of this table, and that he's been systematically stealing client funds for over 2 years to finance personal real estate investments? The accusation hung in the air like a bomb. Robert's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, but he recovered quickly. This is exactly what we expected, Robert told the board. Desperate false accusations against management. It's a classic deflection tactic used by white-collar criminals when they're caught. But Eleanor Hutchinson, one of the younger board members and a respected forensic accountant in her own right, leaned forward with interest. Miss Parker, those are serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support them? I opened my laptop and connected it to the boardroom's projection system. I have bank records, email communications, and recorded conversations proving that Robert Blackstone has stolen over $50 million from client accounts to purchase personal real estate investments. This is preposterous, Foster declared. Mr. Blackstone has served this company with distinction for over 15 years. We will not sit here and listen to— William, Eleanor interrupted sharply. Let her present her evidence. If it's false, that will become apparent quickly enough. I began displaying David's meticulously organized financial records on the projection screen. The first document showed a transfer of $3 million from the Meridian Construction account to a shell company called Sunrise Holdings LLC, authorized with my forged digital signature. This transfer was supposedly authorized by me on March 15th, I explained. But I was in Chicago at the construction industry conference that day, as my travel records will confirm. The IP address shows the authorization came from Mr. Blackstone's personal computer. Robert stepped forward aggressively. Those records can be easily manipulated. This is obviously a sophisticated attempt to frame me for crimes she committed. But I was ready for his response. I displayed the next document, a property deed showing Sunrise Holdings LLC purchasing a luxury condominium complex in Miami Beach for exactly $3 million, with Robert Blackstone listed as the managing member of the LLC. Strange coincidence, I observed. The same amount stolen from our client was used to purchase real estate owned by Mr. Blackstone through his shell company. Murmurs of concern rippled through the board members. Even Foster looked troubled as he examined the evidence. There's more, I continued, displaying email conversations between Robert and various shell company representatives. These emails discuss acquisition opportunities and portfolio diversification using what they call temporarily borrowed capital from client accounts. Robert's face had gone pale, but he wasn't finished fighting. Anyone can fabricate emails and forge documents. The question is where Miss Parker obtained supposedly confidential information about my personal business investments. This suggests a level of corporate espionage that's when I played the recorded conversation. Robert's voice filled the boardroom, crystal clear through the sound system. The Parker woman is getting too close to our arrangement. We need to eliminate her as a threat before she stumbles onto the full scope of our operations. I want her framed for embezzlement and terminated within the week. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert stared at the laptop in shock, apparently unable to believe that his private conversations had been recorded. "Where did you get that recording?" Foster demanded. "From David Martinez, our chief financial officer, who has been documenting Mr. Blackstone's criminal activities for months while being blackmailed into silence." That's when Robert made his final, desperate gambit. Even if that recording is genuine, which I dispute, it proves nothing. David Martinez has been my co-conspirator in this embezzlement scheme from the beginning. Any evidence he's provided is part of an elaborate attempt to shift blame away from themselves and onto me. Mr. Blackstone, Eleanor said coldly, are you seriously suggesting that your own chief financial officer and a senior account manager conspired to embezzle client funds and then decided to frame you by creating fake evidence? Corporate embezzlement often involves multiple conspirators, Robert replied. The sophisticated nature of this scheme suggests extensive planning and inside knowledge. But I had saved the most damning evidence for last. I displayed real-time bank transfer records showing money moving out of client accounts at that very moment. These transfers are happening right now, while we're sitting in this meeting, I announced. $3 million from the Henderson Retirement Fund is being moved to an account controlled by Mountain View Investments Group, another of Mr. Blackstone's shell companies. The board members erupted in shocked conversations. Foster grabbed his phone to contact the bank's security department, while Eleanor began taking notes for what was obviously going to be an immediate investigation. Robert made one last attempt to control the situation. This is clearly a coordinated attack designed to destroy my reputation and steal control of this company. I demand that security remove Miss Parker immediately, and that we contact law enforcement to report this conspiracy. But it was too late. Eleanor had already pulled up the real-time banking system on her own laptop, confirming that the transfers I'd described were indeed occurring. Mr. Blackstone, she said formally, as of this moment, you are suspended from all duties pending a full investigation. Board policy requires that we immediately freeze all accounts under your control and contact federal authorities. Foster looked around the table with resignation. I call for an emergency vote to remove Robert Blackstone as Chief Executive Officer effective immediately. The vote was unanimous. As Foster reached for his phone to contact the FBI, Robert gathered his papers with shaking hands. The confident, manipulative executive, who had terrorized employees and stolen millions of dollars, had been reduced to a desperate criminal facing the collapse of his entire scheme. But even in defeat, his eyes held a promise of continued resistance. I realized that removing him from the CEO position was only the beginning of a much longer fight for justice. What happened next caught everyone by surprise, including me. As Foster was dialing the FBI and Eleanor was documenting the evidence, Timothy Walsh burst through the main boardroom entrance, carrying a large box of documents and what appeared to be additional electronic storage devices. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Timothy said breathlessly, "but there's more evidence that needs to be presented immediately." Robert's face went ashen as he realized that his conspiracy had unraveled far more completely than he had imagined. "Timothy has been helping me document everything for the past 3 hours," I explained to the board. "While you thought I was a terminated employee, I was actually conducting an investigation with the help of several brave colleagues." Timothy began distributing printed documents to each board member. "These are copies of recorded conversations between Mr. Blackstone and his co-conspirators, including detailed discussions of how they plan to frame Miss Parker and transfer the remaining stolen funds to offshore accounts." I had been secretly recording conversations using my phone's voice memo app, but Timothy had gone much further. He had been systematically documenting suspicious activities for weeks, apparently having noticed irregularities in executive communications and financial transfers. "Play recording number 7, Timothy instructed, handing me a small digital recorder. The device filled the boardroom with Robert's voice from earlier that afternoon. "The Parker situation is contained. Once we announce her termination for theft at the board meeting, we'll have 48 hours to complete the final transfers and eliminate any remaining evidence. By Monday morning, $50 million will be safely offshore, and all traces of our arrangement will be permanently erased." "Who was he talking to?" Eleanor demanded. Timothy looked directly at William Foster. "The recording includes both sides of the conversation, ma'am." The implications hit the board members simultaneously. Foster, the distinguished chairman who had been expressing outrage at the allegations against Robert, was actually his partner in the embezzlement scheme. Foster stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger and panic. "This is preposterous. I have served on corporate boards for 30 years with an impeccable reputation. I will not sit here and listen to these fabricated—" "William," Eleanor interrupted, studying the documents Timothy had provided. "These bank records show transfers from client accounts to investment firms where you serve as a board member. The timing correlates exactly with real estate purchases made by companies you control. I realize that the corruption at Blackstone Financial ran deeper than even David had suspected. Robert and Foster had been working together for years, using their combined authority to manipulate financial records, coerce employees, and steal client funds on a massive scale." "There's more," Timothy continued, his confidence growing as he realized the board was taking the evidence seriously. "I've documented threats made against at least 8 employees over the past 2 years. Mr. Blackstone and Mr. Foster have been systematically identifying employees' personal vulnerabilities, medical expenses, educational loans, family emergencies, and using those pressure points to force cooperation with their scheme." He handed Eleanor a thick folder. "These are photocopies of internal emails discussing employee management strategies and leverage optimization. They've been treating their own workforce like a blackmail database." The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Robert and Foster hadn't just been stealing money. They had been operating a systematic program of employee intimidation and manipulation that affected dozens of families. Eleanor was rapidly taking notes, clearly preparing for the legal proceedings that would inevitably follow. "Timothy, how did you gather all this evidence without being detected?" "I work in executive communications," Timothy explained. "Part of my job involves organizing files, managing electronic records, and coordinating between departments. Over time, I noticed patterns that didn't make sense. Employees who seemed frightened of management, financial discrepancies that were explained away too quickly, and conversations that stopped whenever I entered a room." "So you started investigating on your own?" "I started documenting everything I observed, just in case someone eventually asked the right questions. When Miss Parker was framed this morning, I realized the evidence needed to be presented immediately. That's when David Martinez entered the boardroom, followed by 2 federal agents in business suits. David looked exhausted but relieved, as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Special Agent Jennifer Rodriguez, FBI Financial Crimes Task Force," one of the agents announced, displaying her credentials. "We're here to investigate allegations of large-scale embezzlement and employee coercion at this firm." Sarah had clearly followed through on her promise to contact law enforcement. Agent Rodriguez was the specialist Sarah had mentioned, someone with extensive experience in corporate fraud cases. Foster made a desperate attempt to leave the boardroom, but the second agent calmly blocked his path. "Mr. Foster, we'd like you to remain available for questioning." "This is harassment," Foster declared, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm calling my attorney." "That's certainly your right," Agent Rodriguez replied professionally. "But first, we need to secure all financial records and electronic systems to prevent any further unauthorized transfers." Robert, who had been silent since Timothy's revelations, finally spoke up. "I want immunity in exchange for my cooperation. I can provide information about offshore accounts, shell company structures, and other parties involved in these transactions. Mr. Blackstone, Agent Rodriguez said evenly, "We'll discuss cooperation after you've been properly advised of your rights and consulted with legal counsel." Eleanor turned to David. "Mr. Martinez, as Chief Financial Officer, what's the current status of client accounts?" "I've been working with our banking partners to freeze all suspicious transfers," David replied. "We've recovered approximately $43 million of the stolen funds, but about $7 million was successfully moved offshore before we could stop it." "What about the employees who were being coerced?" "We're conducting individual meetings with everyone we believe was affected. So far, we've identified 12 employees who were threatened or manipulated into cooperating with the scheme. All of them are receiving counseling support and legal protection." Agent Rodriguez addressed the entire board. "Ladies and gentlemen, this investigation will require extensive cooperation from your organization. We'll need full access to financial records, employee files, and electronic communications going back at least 3 years." Eleanor nodded. "You'll have our complete cooperation. Our first priority is protecting our clients and employees." As federal agents began securing evidence and reading rights to both Robert and Foster, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that the truth had been exposed, satisfaction that justice was being served, but also sadness about the damage that had been done to so many innocent people. Timothy approached me as the chaos settled into organized law enforcement activity. "Miss Parker, there's something else you should know. When this investigation is complete, the board will need new leadership. Eleanor has asked me to tell you that they want to offer you the position of interim chief executive officer." The irony was overwhelming. In the span of 6 hours, I had gone from being framed for embezzlement to being offered the top position at the company. But more importantly, I had learned that ordinary people working together could defeat even the most sophisticated corruption when they chose courage over self-preservation. Looking around the boardroom at Timothy, David, Eleanor, and the federal agents working to restore integrity to our company, I realized that this experience had taught me something fundamental about leadership and moral courage that no business school could have provided. 6 weeks later, I stood in the same boardroom where my career had nearly been destroyed, but everything had changed. Eleanor Hutchinson had been elected as the new board chairwoman, and the emergency board meeting that had been called to announce my termination was now being remembered as the day Blackstone Financial began its transformation into an ethical organization. The legal proceedings had moved swiftly. Robert Blackstone and William Foster were both facing federal charges for mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Their elaborate scheme had affected not just Blackstone Financial, but several other companies where Foster had served as a board member. The FBI estimated that their combined criminal activities involved over $80 million in stolen funds and affected more than 300 employees across multiple organizations. David Martinez had been officially cleared of any wrongdoing and received recognition for his courage in providing crucial evidence. His daughter's surgery had been successful, financed through a combination of insurance coverage and a medical loan that didn't compromise his professional integrity. Claire Washington had been promoted to senior executive assistant after completing additional training in corporate ethics and legal compliance. Her son Jake maintained his scholarship through a new program that protected students from being used as leverage against their parents. Timothy Walsh had been promoted to Director of Corporate Communications and was leading our efforts to rebuild trust with clients and employees. His attention to detail and moral courage had prevented millions of dollars in additional losses and potentially saved dozens of careers. But the most significant change was cultural. We had implemented new policies requiring multiple authorization for large financial transfers, regular independent audits of all executive activities, and anonymous reporting systems that protected employees from retaliation. Most importantly, we had created an environment where asking questions and raising concerns was encouraged rather than punished. "Mary," Eleanor said as we concluded our weekly leadership team meeting, "I want to discuss something with you privately." We moved to her office, where she had prepared a formal document on her desk. "The board met yesterday to discuss permanent leadership for the company," she began. "We unanimously agreed that we want to offer you the permanent position of Chief Executive Officer." I had been expecting this conversation, but it still felt surreal. 6 weeks ago, I had been fighting for my professional survival. Now, I was being offered the opportunity to lead the company into a new era of ethical business practices. "Eleanor, I'm honored by the offer, but I want to make sure we're doing this for the right reasons. I don't want to be CEO just because I exposed corruption. I want to earn the position based on my ability to lead this organization effectively." "Mary, that's exactly why you're the right person for this job," Eleanor replied. "You've already demonstrated the kind of leadership we need. When you could have simply accepted the termination and moved on to another company, you chose to fight for the truth. When you could have focused solely on clearing your own name, you made sure that other affected employees were protected. That's the kind of character we need at the top of this organization." I accepted the position with a commitment to rebuilding Blackstone Financial as a company that prioritized employee welfare, client protection, and transparent business practices. But I also accepted it with a deep understanding of how quickly ethical organizations can be corrupted when people choose personal security over moral courage. Our first major initiative was establishing the Blackstone Financial Ethics Foundation, funded with recovered assets from Robert's criminal activities. The foundation provided emergency financial assistance to employees facing personal crises, ensuring that no one would ever again be vulnerable to the kind of manipulation and coercion we had experienced. We also created a new position, Chief Ethics Officer, reporting directly to the CEO and the board of directors. This person would be responsible for investigating complaints, monitoring compliance with ethical standards, and ensuring that our policies protected rather than exploited employee vulnerabilities. 3 months after becoming CEO, I received a letter from Special Agent Rodriguez informing me that the FBI had successfully recovered $68 million of the stolen funds and returned them to affected clients. Robert Blackstone had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, while William Foster received 8 years. Both men were also required to pay substantial fines and restitution. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Helen Murphy, an elderly client whose pension had been affected by the embezzlement, wrote to thank me for fighting to recover her retirement savings. Her letter included a simple but powerful message. "Thank you for remembering that behind every account number is a human being who worked their entire life to earn that money." The experience taught me that integrity isn't just about following rules or avoiding obvious mistakes. Real integrity requires the courage to act on your principles even when the personal cost seems overwhelming. It means choosing to protect others even when you're under attack yourself. And it means recognizing that the most important leadership decisions are often made not in boardrooms or strategic planning sessions, but in moments when you have to choose between what's easy and what's right. I learned that sometimes the biggest battles aren't against external enemies, but against the corruption that hides behind friendly faces and corporate titles. True strength isn't about climbing the ladder. It's about having the courage to tear down the whole structure when it's built on lies. Trust your instincts, document everything, And never let anyone make you doubt your own integrity. Sometimes the right thing to do feels impossible until you realize that doing nothing is the only real impossibility you can't live with. Today, Blackstone Financial employs over 400 people who come to work each day knowing that their employer values their integrity over their compliance, their questions over their silence, and their welfare over their willingness to be manipulated. That transformation didn't happen because of policies or procedures. It happened because ordinary people chose extraordinary courage when it mattered most. Before I finish, I want to ask you something. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you knew something was wrong but felt powerless to change it? Maybe at work, in your family, or in your community? What gave you the strength to speak up, or what held you back? Your experiences and insights matter, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories about courage, integrity, and the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that standing up for what's right is always worth the risk. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you have more power to create positive change than you might realize. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to say, "This isn't right," to transform an entire organization and protect countless others from harm.